Right, looking at one of our headlines this morning, in fact, two of our headlines in a little bit more detail. Russia has stopped its gas flowing into Europe via Ukraine. Very pleased to be speaking now to Christof Ruhl, Senior Research Scholar at the Centre for Global Energy Policy at Columbia University. Morning, Christof. Happy New Year.
Good morning, Brandy. Same to you. May it be a happy one, yeah?
May it. And we'll get into your predictions for just how happy it is going to be for oil producers a little bit later on. But let's start with that Russian gas story. It's the end of an agreement rather than any sort of knee-jerk reaction. But put it into context for us. How big a deal is it?
If you come from the historical or even the political side, it's a very big deal. You could say, it's a historic mark. As you said, the end of deliveries from Russia to Europe through Ukraine over more than 40 years now. If you look at it with the eyes of an economist, however, it's not a big deal because the deliveries have already fallen so much. Europe used to get 35% of its gas from Russia. Now it's down to 8%. And even the deliveries into Slovakia and Hungary and Austria used to be through this pipeline, which is closed now, used to be, to give you a sense of the number, 65 billion cubic meters, and now it's down to 14. So it can be compensated for. There will be no blackouts, with one small exception in Moldavia, and there will be no disaster. And as you said, it has been pre-announced. But historically, it's a end of an area, you could say, if it lasts.
So who benefits from this in terms of who's stepped in to fill the gaps?
If an energy partnership, for better or worse, ends, beneficiaries are usually in the minority. So in this case, consumers might marginally pay higher rates, but the European Union has secured so much new access points for liquefied natural gas as opposed to the old traditional pipeline gas deliveries that there will be no shortages and no meaningful price impact. Beneficiaries in the long term will be a gas market which becomes increasingly globalized because it increasingly is able to rely on shipments which are flexible of liquefied natural gas, which can be redirected across the oceans, across continents, very much like the oil market, and becomes less dependent on these point-to-point pipelines, which used to dominate the picture in Europe until the Russian invasion of the Ukraine and the subsequent cutoff from Russian gas.
We saw gas prices rising before the new year on forecasts of a colder winter on the US East Coast. How prepared, how well stocked up are both the US and Europe for this winter?
I think very well prepared. When you see gas prices moving, the first thought which should come to mind is the weather. It really is the case also now that we have a very cold weather in the US, that we have a cold winter expected in Europe. That has driven prices up a little bit. It is a rare exception that the gas market is dominated from sudden changes, quick disruptions, such as was the case 2 years ago. Europe has stomached this cutoff from 35% of its supplies remarkably well because of the new infrastructure it has been built, because of the flexibility, the new flexibility in these globalized gas markets. And from here onwards, barring other violent disruptions or wars, it will be more or less a situation which, as we are used to, is driven by the weather. Plus, the Biden administration was very cautious and put a moratorium on U.S. exports, but the U.S. is now a major natural gas exporter as well. And the Trump administration is more likely to allow for the free flow of exports. And that will also smoothen markets and keep prices a little bit under control.
Oh, of course, you're speaking to us from the East Coast, and you've got a big year ahead of you with a new administration coming in, which, as you say, US energy dominance has been one of the things that President Trump has spoken about in his campaigning on his way into the White House. What do you think you're going to be covering this year when it comes to energy stories coming out of the US? What do you think is going to shape the first year of the Trump administration?
I think I'm just trying to map it out. I think it's the West Coast because I'm speaking to you from Abu Dhabi.
Oh, my bad. Keep going.
But the Trump administration's first year, I think, will be dominated by two things in energy. One is the attempt to sort out problems among big energy producers in the Middle East and in Russia, the two military conflicts there. I do think that entails the risk of putting harsh sanctions back into place in Iran, and therefore has a little bit of an upside price risk to it. The other clearly identifiable policy plank of the Trump administration is what people call drill, baby, drill, which means freeing up of more federal lands, being easier on permits, deregulating domestic energy supplies. And this is something, a development over the last 10, 15 years, which has really changed geopolitics beyond recognition. That is that the US has become energy independent in the sense that they produce more domestic energy of oil, of coal, of gas than they need, and they become an exporter. And this is still reshaping sort of the global political map. This is some development which we should see continuing, if not accelerating. And that will project more economic power, not only soft power, but economic power of the US globally. That's a process which Trump will ride to the full extent.
Oil prices for the year. We've had one local economist say Emirates NBD expects it to come in at about $74 on average a barrel, slightly lower than we've seen in 2024. Rich, my co-host, disagrees. He thinks we're looking at more like $40 or $50 a barrel. What do you reckon?
I'm between your co-host and the expert, and with sympathies for the co-host. Because, first of all, I'm too old to put oil prices and a date in the same line, because it's always wrong. But secondly, what we see clearly for 2025 is excess supply. So there is more supply of oil coming online than demand projected. And in particular, what we know is that this supply will come from outside the OPEC plus countries. So it is the kind of supply which is driven by private profits and not by political considerations, and therefore unlikely to be cut. So in that kind of situation, what could keep prices from falling indeed into a range of around 60 maybe, is only further disruptions elsewhere. And these could only come either from OPEC, which has already cut a lot and therefore is unlikely to cut more because they need the money, or from disruptions of a more violent nature, such as sanctions or wars. And this is what has kept prices floating up so far. The threat of, or the fear of sanctions being reimposed in Iran and Venezuela by the US, the threat of further supply disruptions in the Gulf region because of Israel now attacking Yemen and the Houthis there moving a little further east in their attacks. These are the fears which keep oil prices up against a reality, an economic reality of oversupply, which presses oil markets down. And the outcome will depend on the interplay of these two factors. Right now, everybody thinks the oil market is very, very stable, but that's a surface phenomenon. Underneath, there's quite some movement which could go in either direction. On balance, I would stick with the economic forecast of your colleague, and that would imply a fall in oil prices on average for next year.
Christof Ruhl, Senior Research Scholar at the Centre of Global Energy at Columbia University, but speaking to us this morning from Abu Dhabi. We appreciate your time.
Dubai Eye 103.8.
Join the conversation.